We're happy to be here with Kristen Welker, anchor of Meet the Press. So great to spend some time with you here in New York.
It's so wonderful to be with you, Melissa. Thank you.
So, Kristen, I want to start with an issue that's really top of mind for New Yorkers right now. It's the humanitarian crisis that's now playing out in our city. We have 63,000 migrants in the city's care, $2 billion already spent, potentially headed to $12 billion. And just this week, we learned triple the number of buses from Texas just within the past couple of weeks. So today we're seeing what really appears to be a big shift from the Biden administration, right? This change at the border. Tell us a little bit about what President Biden is doing.
Well, part of what the president is doing is responding to pressure from mayors like here in New York City and other cities who are dealing with this influx of migrants that you're describing, and the administration announcing that it would essentially bypass 26 federal laws to start building more border enhancement at the border, at the Texas border. And so this is significant in part because President Biden has said that he's opposed to building border walls. So it's a shift in that regard.
Didn't he say during the campaign that he would not build one more foot of this wall if he were in charge?
Exactly. That's the quote. And so he's going to get a number of questions about that, particularly from Democrats, I would imagine. But look, here's the big takeaway. The administration is responding to this pressure and responding to what is a growing crisis. The fact that we're seeing these record numbers of migrants at the border, the fact that this is impacting cities like New York, other cities across the United States. And from a political perspective, taking a step back, if you look at our polling, Republicans get higher marks on this issue. This is a president who's running for re-election. He's locked in a razor-tight race with the GOP frontrunner, former President Trump. It's clear that this is weighing on him, and this is a shift, an attempt to deal with it.
I would imagine that this would be somewhat double-edged in terms of a reaction from voters, right? Republicans will be able to say that he just took one of their talking points, and Democrats, especially progressives, could be critical of him on this.
There's no doubt about it, both in terms of this move that we're talking about, building border wall, but also a move that he made several weeks ago, which was announcing temporary protective status for 500,000 Venezuelans. That was also aimed at relieving some of the pressure that you're talking about with migrants here in New York. And already you saw advocates come forward and say, hey, wait a minute, this shouldn't just apply to Venezuelans. This should apply to other nationalities. But he's also getting critiqued, as you say, from both sides for not doing enough.
It also came after about a year, if not more, of semi-radio silence from the White House on this issue. And based on our conversations with the White House and Homeland Security, the mayor out there, the governor begging every day for federal relief, TPS was not something that they really were looking forward to doing. So in addition to maybe some pressure from Democratic donors, which we've reported on here in New York, what else went into this shift?
I think that all of the factors that you are laying out so well went into this shift. The fact that the administration is getting pressure from mayors across this country, governors, from lawmakers who represent the people who live at the border. And when you talk to the communities who are impacting both here in New York City and at the border, they say, look, this is a crisis. It is impacting our economies. It's impacting our families here. And so I think there was a growing political realization that this was something that the White House had to deal with. So again, you're seeing these moves by the president. But big picture, the issue is there hasn't been immigration reform. And so this is, I think, one of the challenges of our time. Can Democrats, can Republicans come together and find a real solution?
Are they interested in doing it, or does it play better for them to just point fingers at one another?
It's a great question. And here we are in this heated campaign season. We're not even in 2024 yet, by the way, but look at what's happening with the GOP primary. You have all of those candidates staking out their positions, what they would do to address this issue, this surge in migrants at the southern border. And so it's top of mind for Republican voters. It's top of mind for general election voters, but it's been one of the key issues that we've seen play out on the primary stage.
And for local Democrats, it's been a bit of a walk on a thin line between calling out what obviously needs to happen, in many people's opinion, and declaring that the president should close the borders, which is not something that is considered to be, in line with the Democratic policies.
This is something that has been a challenge for the president since the first day that he took office. And part of what you're asking about is the messaging that is coming out of the White House. Has the administration been firm enough? We know that Mayor Adams is taking a trip to the border to basically send the message, do not come.
To the Darien Gap.
Yes, and to the heart of the crisis.
Yes.
And there has been pressure on the administration, on the president, on the vice president to send that message more forcefully in the beginning days of the Biden administration that essentially the border is closed. Now, we've seen the messaging shift, by the way, in the years that the president has taken office. And really, we've seen officials try to really toughen what they are saying on this issue, again, to respond to not only the reality at the border, this increase in migrants, but to the political pressures as well.
I want to move on to other subjects, but just one more question because I'm obsessed with this migrant story.
It's an important one.
It's the question around New York's right to shelter and whether or not in Washington, D.C., is there a perception that New York's right to shelter has been sort of a self-inflicted wound? The White House denied that New York's right to shelter was part of the reason why they didn't send us more money because, there was no end in sight. We would just keep needing to send more and more money. And so what's the perception? Is that something that's risen to the dialogue in D.C.?
I think everyone is focused on New York, and I think that it's one of the issues that's up for debate, certainly. And the way in which Mayor Adams and your governor has addressed this crisis, trying to deal with it in a way that is humane, that is realistic for the people living here, and takes into account what everyone who lives in New York and the state of New York needs. But look, I think this is one of the issues that's going to be debated throughout this campaign season.
I think it's going to be
and beyond,
front and center, no doubt.
Absolutely.
Another local story, Kristen, that we've been focused on here: allegations of gold bars, cash, a gifted Mercedes, corruption charges against New Jersey Senator Menendez. How do you see this playing out? Do you think he can survive this?
That's a great question. What we have seen against Senator Menendez is a growing list of his own Democratic colleagues in both chambers calling for him to step down here in New York, saying that these allegations are too serious. But he has been defiant in the face of these allegations, and so far, he's not going anywhere. I do think that the game has changed a little bit when you take a step back, when you think about former President Trump, for example, who's facing 4 indictments. Politically speaking, he's only gotten stronger. If you're Senator Menendez, you're clearly looking at that and saying, I'm going to wait and let this play out. I do think that for the Democratic Party, though, the implications are significant because they were heading into 2024 and wanting to make the case that they were the party of ethics. They were the party on the right side of the law. These allegations make it harder, I think, for Democrats to do that. On the flip side, what do you have? You have a number of Republicans, including former President Trump, saying that there are 2 systems of justice. Well, it gets tougher to make that case when you have one of the top Democratic senators who's now facing these very serious charges. So I think that politically speaking, we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. But what we are seeing and what we can be sure of is that the pressure is mounting on him to step down.
Kristen, tell me more about the chaos surrounding the speakership right now. It took 15 votes, if I remember correctly, to elect Kevin McCarthy the first time. How many votes, how many days or weeks do you think it will take for Republicans to coalesce around someone else?
It's such a great question. We know that they are aiming to hold another vote next week for a new speaker, but there's no guarantee that they are going to be able to elect a new speaker in that time frame. We know Steve Scalise has come forward, Jim Jordan. It's not clear that either of these candidates has enough votes, but I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about the chaos that we witnessed unfold. We are witnessing Congress in a state of paralysis with just about 40 days until the next potential government shutdown. I was talking to swing voters in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, who said it feels like there is a leadership gap, and they were so frustrated by what they saw on Capitol Hill because they are concerned about spending and they are worried that the government's going to shut down. So I think it's emblematic of this moment that we're in, which is incredibly challenging politically.
And do you think that Democrats in the House minority, led by our very own Hakeem Jeffries, made a political calculation to sort of choose that the optics of the chaos over potentially helping them keep McCarthy in power because that would be politically more beneficial to them?
There's no doubt that politics were at play, but I think there were a lot of factors at play. I think one of the final straws for Democrats, at least if you believe what we're hearing from them, is that Speaker McCarthy came out after they had worked hard to try to strike a deal with him to keep the government open and essentially blamed them for the chaos that was unfolding instead of the few members within his own conference that were basically saying we're not going to agree to any deal to keep the government open unless you slash spending significantly. And so what we are hearing from Democrats is that they didn't trust him. What is notable from my perspective is that you're hearing that from a number of Republicans too. But again, the takeaway here, if you are an American voter sitting at home watching this unfold, is that the government is not working. What's going on here? Why aren't they getting to work? Why are they
Nobody's
taking
in
a whole
charge.
week? Who's in charge?
Right.
Exactly. And why are they taking a whole week before they even attempt to elect another Speaker of the House?
You know, and some Republicans here in New York have been very critical of Matt Gaetz and his role. Mike Lawler from upstate New York, you know, saying that there's going to be a real reckoning within the conference. He called it disgraceful. So, you know, how does describe for us the two different sort of factions within the Republican Party and how you think who cobbles together, like what does the candidate need, who cobbles together enough support to get the next position?
It's such a great question. The two factions of the Republican Party, first of all, you have Matt Gaetz, this small group of hardline Republicans who are saying, we want spending to be slashed. We don't care about what has been agreed to with the White House several months ago. We want to see spending levels far below what they were. We don't want new funding for Ukraine and a whole host of other issues that they want to see happen that are non-starters with Democrats. And then you have more moderate Republicans who say that's not how governing gets done in Washington. We have to find areas of compromise. So who emerges as the new speaker? I think it remains to be seen. Look, I think that Steve Scalise is someone who certainly seems to be in the more moderate branch of the Republican Party, but it's not clear that he'll get the votes. So it's a big question mark still, I think, about how they move forward.
Turning to the quite tumultuous trial of Trump taking place here in the city this week, what do you think former President Trump hoped to gain or achieve by appearing in person at this civil trial when he was not obligated to do so?
We witnessed the former president turn this trial into a campaign event, effectively. It was a chance for him, even though legally speaking he was sanctioned for this, to speak out, to fire out against the judge, the prosecutors in this case, and essentially to energize his base. Look at what we have seen. The president has faced one indictment after another. His poll numbers continue to go up. He skipped the first two GOP primary debates. His poll numbers continue to go up. How is he doing that? He's doing that with this fiery rhetoric, energizing his base, effectively saying that he is the target of political persecution. They are buying it, even though, again, he's faced some real legal pressure for speaking out and maligning the prosecutors and the judges in the cases that he faces, including here in New York.
We've seen his base stick by him the whole time, right?
Yeah.
But is there a point at which his bravado, posting a picture of this judge's clerk in this case, accusing her of being Chuck Schumer's girlfriend, has any impact? Like, does that change any votes?
It doesn't change votes with his base. We just have never seen the former president's base ever waver in their support of him. The question becomes, what happens with moderate Republicans? And if he does win the GOP primary, how does this play in a general election? How does it play with independent voters, undecided voters? How does it play with moderate Republicans who maybe voted for him in 2016 but voted for President Biden in 2020? How does he win those people back? How does he win the voters back who he lost on January 6th, for example? I've been out on the campaign trail talking to Republicans, some of them who say, we supported him until he started saying that the election was stolen. That's when our faith in him started to shake. So that's where the big question becomes.
Or to a lesser extent, as it pertains to this case, the people who maybe voted for him because they thought he was a good businessman, now seeing that, you know, his wealth was not as advertised.
And that's why this case is so personal for the former president.
And his family.
And his family, because this is literally the Trump business, the Trump brand is the bedrock of who Donald Trump is as a businessman and as a politician and as a reality TV star. It's at the center of everything he's ever done.
It really is. Finally, as you mentioned, we're watching these Republican primary debates.
Yeah.
Nothing really seems to move the needle. What are you seeing or hearing in your experiences covering this campaign? What does the polling show about Trump's potential to become president again?
The polling is fascinating at this point. It shows that he beats just about every other candidate by double digits, both nationally and when you look at some of these early voting states. It gets more complicated when you do a head-to-head matchup with President Biden. He's in a dead heat with President Biden, which is really striking. But I've been talking to voters out on the campaign trail, and my big takeaway is they feel frustrated by the state of our politics right now. They feel like there's a lack of leadership. Even people who support former President Trump are frustrated by the legal troubles that he's facing. And they want to have a discussion about the issues that they feel matter to them. The economy being very high at the top of that list, as you're talking about, immigration and migration also.
And they're frustrated with Biden as well, though,
yes,
right?
Absolutely. And frustrated, and based on my conversations, there are concerns about his ability to serve. And our polling shows that. Our polling shows that more people are actually worried about President Biden, his age and his ability to serve, than they are worried about former President Trump and his legal troubles. So it tells you that President Biden is facing an uphill battle as well, even though he is the incumbent. Now, the White House's stance on this is, he has some time to really ramp up. But you have seen a shift in his tone. We, of course, saw President Biden deliver that speech about democracy, effectively painting former President Trump as a threat to the democracy. So I think they're looking at this polling and saying we've got to get started a little bit sooner than we thought.
It is a fascinating time. Kristen, great to have you.
Great conversation. Thank you so
you.
much for having me.